A fascinating conversation coming up. We're going to have a fireside chat with Rosye Cloud, who most of you know, and Bill Fox, who may be new to folks in this room. So as a senior leader and advocate for College Promise, Rosye Cloud has worked to expand access to post-secondary education programs across all 50 states and Washington, D.C. Dr. Fox has held visiting appointments as professor at the University of Hawaii, scholar at the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, and distinguished Fulbright chair at the University of Frankfurt, Germany. In addition, he has served as a consultant in over 40 countries and 15 U.S. states on a wide range of public policy issues. Dr. Fox is a member of the American Economics Association and past president and recipient of the Stephen D. Gold Award from the National Tax Association. Please give Rosye and Bill a warm welcome.
Is this thing on? All right, good deal. Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you today. I have to say this is probably one of the conversations I've been the most excited about because Dr. Fox is one of those economists that actually can tell the story in language we all understand, but understands our business. So thank you so much for joining us here today. I wonder, as we jump right in, for most of us here, we're working on the front lines with students, with organizations serving communities that, frankly, are experiencing post-COVID devastation at times, right? We've not seen the economic mobility we had hoped for. We're seeing a tremendous amount of rhetoric, all over. But I think it's an opportunity here for us to talk about what is the real state of the economy. What are the implications to the workforce? And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I also want to make sure we end with how are you fixing this, right? How are you going to fix it for the country? So no pressure on that. But Dr. Fox, any opening remarks for us as we get started?
Well, let me start, first of all, by saying what a privilege it is to be with this group. You all are doing such important work that's impacting people's lives. So it really is a privilege to be with you today. It's particularly a privilege to be here when Randy is recognized. I first met him in 2008, and we were both doing a presentation to Leadership Knoxville, and Randy was talking about Knox Achieves. I'd never heard of it, and he's giving this presentation on it, and I'll be 100% honest, I've told him this too. I'm sitting there thinking, this is a really nice idea that will never happen. And as I was saying in comments about him later, it's because I didn't know Randy Boyd. And just an amazing program. But also Chrissy and her team and the role that they have played in making that happen. And I admire their work so much, and even to be around it was really a privilege. So thank you for allowing me to be here.
Thank you. We are thrilled to have you here, and I want to open up with a little bit of just stage setting, which is, so tell me about that October economics job report. Where are we?
Okay, so the people from Tennessee know that I don't know how to talk without slides, and so you've taken away my crutch, and I have to just sit here and talk about the economy. The answer was we had employment growth that's much slower than we've had over the last couple of years. 150,000 jobs. Now remember, there was a strike going on in the automobile industry. That did influence the numbers, 35,000 or so out of that. But 150,000 jobs a month is actually a really strong number if we think about it in the long-term context of things. So we're not going to average that many jobs going forward from here. So while people talked a lot about slower job growth, in fact, it's at least as good as we're going to expect in the future. Keep in mind that the labor force that we have as a country is not going to grow in this decade. Population growth is the lowest since 1940. Now, none of us were here in this window, but there was a unique thing about 1940, right? All the men were out fighting in World War II, and so birth rates were incredibly low in that decade. And of course, a lot of people got killed in that decade, and so really slow growth. We're talking about that level of growth in recent years, just really slow population growth. Add to it the fact that the population is aging, and it's not just the baby boomers, even the generation after baby boomers, as they retire, will be shrinking the labor force. And so it's a really unique time in our history to see a labor force that's flattening out.
I mean, and you think of the reality as we work with students, as the programs here, I mean, they're touching hundreds of thousands of students every day across the country. It's tough to tell new workers to take that risk when they're carrying the burden of debt, when they're carrying the burden of family responsibilities and caregiving responsibilities. And so is it surprising that you're seeing these declines based on where this outlook has really been for the last couple of years?
Well, you know, from the perspective of the individuals coming into the labor force, the young people, the challenge is there just aren't enough of them. And, you know, the birth rates are at all-time lows right now. You know, so we're thinking back, what was the world like 18 years ago, right? When these people are now getting up to working age. And birth rates were starting to decline then. We're on the front end of what we're going to see as a very slow growing labor force. And hey, I have a vested interest in you all making sure all these young people get in the labor force to pay for my Social Security and Medicare. So this is important work, even to me personally, right? As well as to our economy.
So we think of, you know, population slowdown. You're seeing that productivity hopefully increasing with technology, but aren't we in an interesting window where technology is not having the traditional implication to us right now? I mean, what are you seeing, especially with some of the emergence of technology?
Well, Rosye, you made a good point there. Okay, so think about economics simply. You want to think about what's the growth rate in the economy. You can just add two things. How many, the percentage growth in workers, and add to it the percentage growth in productivity, just how productive are workers, and that's growth. So if the labor force itself is flattening, number of workers, then economic growth has to come from productivity, or we don't have it. And so if you look at the history of the country, as we had new technologies, they tended to create more jobs. Now, they might have replaced some people in certain industries. So think of the automobile industry when it happened. The horse and buggy guys lost jobs, right? But we created more jobs on net as we build roads and we are able to move goods faster and this whole range of things. Electricity added jobs. The last 40 years, that's been less true. It's the technologies have not necessarily been job creating. But the technologies, and particularly the ones that we're going to see in the future, I mean, think about it. The people, at least the ones who are going to get a 4-year degree that you're talking to now, who are, let's say, seniors in high school, we're preparing a labor force that starts in 2030. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about people who are going to live from, or work from 2030 to 2070. Now, what is productivity going to look like? What's their job going to look like? What kind of technology that we cannot even imagine today are these people going to be confronted with? And will it make them more productive? Probably. Will it replace some jobs? Yeah, you look at AI, and I know you mentioned, we talked the other day, a Goldman report, and there's a couple of researchers at UCLA have written a really interesting study on what are the jobs at risk from AI. And it's not construction workers, it's not people who are waiting on tables, it's lawyers. And some mathematicians and some coding. I mean, this will have impacts at both the most skilled and the least skilled. But lawyers who can work with AI will be incredibly successful. And so what we're doing is we're creating a labor force that can work with these new technologies and be that much more productive.
So I think you're hitting at the core of a challenge that for many of us is on top of mind, which is we've got a situation where we have young men and women preparing, engaging with promise programs, thinking about their career choice, thinking about a career pathway that may or may not exist the way that it looks like today.
Won't exist
the
way it looks
be honest,
like today.
Right? Won't exist the way that it looks like today. And at the same time, there is definitely a national conversation, as you just said, that that framing of, but construction is not changing. Some of these other jobs are not changing. And so it's eroded in some communities the value proposition of continuing in higher ed. And I think that the economy bears a different picture, though, for high-skilled workers, right, and knowledge workers in this space. But I think that you have this friction where we're giving these messages, especially to young men, right, which is as they're making important decisions, and it's playing out in the economy. I mean, how do you, is that fair? I mean, is this?
So let's take a little longer-term look at what's been happening to wages. So if you look at wages, let's say from 1980 to the current, so the last 40 years. What you'll see is when we net out inflation, we didn't think much about inflation in the 2000s, right, until the last few years. But if we net out inflation from that time period, we saw real wages for people with less than an associate's degree falling really pretty continuously through that window until recent years. But if you compare wages today with like 1980, 81 in those people with a high school degree or less, what you'll see is in fact they're lower than they were 40 years ago. Now they're coming back up some now, and you know, my favorite story about this, I end up going to Nashville a lot over the years and speaking over there and so forth, and I stop at the Buc-ee's on the way over there. You all maybe been to Buc-ee's. Here's a Buc-ee's fan right here. I see it. And so you're stopping there for like, I don't know, the jerky or something like that. I'm stopped. I can see they're both Jerky's fans. I'm stopping to look at the wages that they're offering on. You remember that billboard out front where they tell what they're paying for different kind of jobs, and looking at how much can be earned in, you know, working at Buc-ee's. And I mean, I like Buc-ee's, so I'm not trying to put jobs down at Buc-ee's. And they've grown up, and right next to it, there's a sign at the prison that's paying, okay, this is pretty good wage in Knoxville, in Tennessee, $45,000 a year, and a bonus to take that job. And it's easy to imagine young people, and again, particularly young males, saying, why in the world would I go to college when I can do this? And I can go home and I'm done. And the answer is, it's not what you can earn at 22 you ought to be thinking about. It's what you can earn over your lifetime. And it's very clear that the wages are higher for people who have more education. And the more education you get, the better. Now, there are some details we can talk about. You know, does it matter what that education's in? And it does. But the more education, the higher your earnings, the more likely you're to be in the labor force. You know, not everybody in, you know, let's say 25 to 65 is in the labor force. You have to either have a job or be looking for one. A lot of people aren't. The labor force participation rate is much higher. The unemployment rates are much lower as education goes up. But the key thing is it's not necessarily true that at 23 you're earning more money because you went to college. Where we see the big differences are by the time you get into your 40s. Now, if I'm 18 years old, me in my 40s is a kind of a hard thing for me to envision, right? I get that. And there's the problem. We're asking 18-year-olds to think about what's their life going to be from 2030 to 2070. And I mean, I have great admiration for this group who's able to think about creative ways to help those young folks understand this. I mean, I can read the numbers really well and you know, show you charts of them. You know, you are the people who know how do we give this message to young people that really matters. And so somewhere, let's say in the mid-30s, the person will break even and they will have earned more, even taking out the fact that they've taken time, you know, from earning to go to school. And if we look at their 40s, the earnings differential are huge. And this is true. It doesn't matter what demographic you talk about, what ethnicity, what gender, you see the same thing. And in fact, it's young men of color who gain the most from, you know, relative to what they otherwise would get from getting an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. It matters most to them.
I mean, I think, and that's a message, I think, in the movement that we can capitalize on, right? I mean, I think the conversation about today and the future and lifetime, and you made an important point that it's those 30s and 40s, in many cases, the age of parents of individuals that we're serving. And so a lot of the movement has started to really, in the College Promise community, we started to look at how do we help both parents and their children at the same time, because I think what you're also alluding is that adults right now, prime age workers, are feeling some pressure in the economy in a way that maybe we did not anticipate.
Well, and again, particularly ones who have less education, because as you say, if they're 40 today, they're suddenly seeing the person from across town who went to college making a lot more money than they are, and they're not seeing any ability to increase their wages that exist for people with more education and frankly, with more skills. It's about skills ultimately.
Well, and I think when you look at, I always, keep an eye on when you think of these themes of deaths of despair, the issue of just instability. You're looking at populations that are they're not seeing that light at the end of this journey. They're seeing a cliff, right, economically, especially as they age, and that's very terrifying for many adults that have a lot of responsibilities.
Yeah, well, I'll say again, real wages, so just take what people are earning and net out inflation, are lower than 4 decades ago in an economy that's growing. So what's my only chance if I'm 40 or 45? Well, first of all, I could go back and get some education. So I know that's a real chance, and I'm not trying to put that one down. But if you don't do that, what's my only option? Well, it's to work another job, because I can't increase my earnings where I am at the same rate. Now, let me reiterate, wages are growing fast for lowest wage people right now. The last couple of years, and so that I think is what's caused some confusion among young people, thinking, why go to college? Because there's this really short-term gain in wages. Have you all seen these little food delivery vehicles on campus? Did you see those things? The little bugs running around. Now, those are a great example to me, because they're the front end of autonomous mobility. And, if you're from a bigger city, you may see versions of that are delivering in downtown, not just food, but delivering products around. Again, particularly young men, but not just young men, who are working in an Amazon warehouse, or who are, and we have 3 of them in this area, or who are delivering food, or who are driving people around for Uber. And all of this will go away. Even one of the 3 Amazon warehouses here in Knoxville, in a low-wage area, is using robots heavily to do this kind of work. And again, think about Walmart. What's Walmart doing today? They have a truckload of stuff that's coming to the back of the store. Somebody is unloading that stuff into the back of the store. Somebody else is putting it out on the shelves. And what are they then doing? They're hiring yet another person to take it back off the shelf. Now, this doesn't make any sense, and Walmart knows this doesn't make any sense. So a bunch of those kind of jobs, which are paying reasonable wages right now, are going to go away with technology. And as that happens, what will these young people do?
Well, the instability in that, right? Because for many of them, this is becoming their actual living wage job, right, in lieu of pursuing higher education. And again, when you pull the string, right, we have these higher, I call them breakthrough jobs, that initial job that you can finally get that apartment, you're able to finally, feed yourself, those types of things. I worry those might be the very first phase as AI continues to get steam that go away. So we're inflating that pipeline right now, but in fact, there's a possibility that's going to be one of the first to go, don't you think? Is that?
I think they will be among the kind of warehousing jobs, the delivery jobs where you can make $20 an hour or more are going to go away, and the technology will replace them. And in part, companies will realize that you remember what I said about labor force, it's going to grow very, very slowly or be flat. They're going to realize there aren't going to be enough workers. So they're going to replace those people with technology. And of course, some of it is, because we don't have workers, but some of it is the workers we do have are also going to lose the opportunity.
you know, some of the programs here have heard me say this as we travel around the country, and Martha and I spent a lot of time with private equity and other organizations kind of talking about our students and talking about these issues. And Martha, I'll remember a dinner we had not too long ago that really stopped us at our tracks, because around the table are some of the, I would say, most influential firms who were very candid in saying, we really love what you're doing with Promise, but the truth is we anticipate replacing all of these folks with automation. Right, so we're really, we understand that they may not be a role for them in our business units, you know, sooner than you think, and so, you know, they might just drop out of the labor force, and they're counting on that, right? I mean, in the sense of they recognize it's part of the cost of doing business. And I think for Martha and I, it really, you know, we were outraged, right? We were sitting there saying, well, no, like we've got a role for them. We have a responsibility and promise to connect with them, and these are the folks that we're worried about the most. And I think we're seeing that already. I mean, I think AI came in, and we thought, well, this is a fun toy. And you mentioned this as well. This is a fun thing to do. I can do something, you know, fun with it. It's going to save me 15, 20 minutes. 5 years from now, it's not going to be a toy. It's probably going to be a very different reality.
I agree with you. A couple of reactions to what you said. First of all, the labor force participation rate, that's the share of people who are in traditional working ages. That share is, okay, there's been a lot of conversation about what happened during COVID. In fact, that share started declining in 2000. It didn't start declining last week. And we're seeing it coming down, and in COVID it shot down. It's mostly back where it was before COVID. So this is not a COVID story. This is, again, likely workers who are getting, in many cases, discouraged. There are other factors, but one of those factors is discouraged workers. But secondly, none of us, including the people you're talking about, can know for sure where jobs are going to be lost. And how the technologies will evolve. And they, you know, they don't have to just be AI. I mean, go to a McDonald's, and how do they fill your soft drink? It's not AI, it's just a little mechanical machine that now fills it. I mean, the technologies replacing workers can be very sophisticated, or they can be very simple, but replacing workers nonetheless. And where we're going to see, I think, the most technologies will be linked to the lower end part of the market. Not exclusively, as I said before, but then how does a person protect themselves? They can't totally protect themselves and say, I won't have to evolve. What they can do, though, is have the capacity to move from one thing to another. And that means a really solid education at the beginning, and then probably some training as they go along. I was in a conversation here just this week where we were talking about, you know, we're mostly teaching, you know, 4-year and beyond folks, but the idea of what role do we have for helping people who have gotten a degree from us stay skilled 10 years after they finish here? And we're going to see this continue to evolve. And the workers need the capacity to take advantage of this reskilling.
I wonder, I'm going to poll the audience for those programs. How many of you all are currently providing career advising services to your students? How many of you all feel equipped with some of this information we're talking about AI and some of the disruption that's happening? How many of you feel that you're up to date on this stuff? Right, and so I think that's why I think this is why you're giving us nuggets, and I think this is why our National Leadership Council is going to be so important, because I think there's issues that are happening so quickly, and the systems, you know, I'm not saying higher ed isn't agile, but I'm saying it takes a little while sometimes to pivot, right, and to kind of stay abreast of some of these trends. And you have students making lifelong decisions at 18 and 19, and you have parents, frankly, that are now being displaced at the same time, which puts pressure on these students too, right? So you mentioned earlier degree choice matters. Could you tell us a little bit about what you mean by that as we're doing this work?
Well, so more education matters, whether it's some college, an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, or a certificate along the way. Any of those will increase your earnings potential. I'll admit, on average or the median, it does not mean every single person. And so if we want to maximize our return, then there's a couple of things we need to think about. First of all, persistence really makes a difference. That, having some college, several classes as opposed to a degree does increase earning capacity according to our best research, but an associate's degree increases it a lot more. And then a bachelor's degree increases that ever so much more. Randy mentioned some numbers earlier, and they're qualitatively right. $500,000 more with an associate's degree, $1.5 million more with a bachelor's degree. And so again, more education matters. What you choose to major in makes a difference. Things that are more career job oriented are more likely to earn a higher return. And again, that's not to say that people, I'm hesitant to throw out examples from some of the humanities won't end up doing great, but they're going to have to find their own way. They don't have a natural entry point into the labor force, and so what you major in, and again, persistence is so important. And I know again, Tennessee Achieves was talking about earlier, Chrissy, about some of the efforts they're making to keep students in, and Anthony Wise and the success they've had at Pellissippi State, because if we really want to impact people's lives, we need to help them persist to the point of degrees.
Well, and it is now about building the ability for lifelong learning, because these pathways are not a final destination at age 22, right? You have to, I think, with the pace of change in the U.S. and globally, demands that you stay informed and your skill set continuously is refreshed. And I think many of the programs are moving to a 2-gen model, or allowing older adults to be part of that Promise Scholarship program. And I think that's essential, because this isn't something that you do once. This isn't where completion is success for our students, right? This is part of navigating that journey over a lifetime in a very volatile time in many communities, right? Because they're having employers relocate. You're seeing a lot of this turbulence happen. I wonder if you can tell the story. When we had our prep session for this conversation, you talked a little bit about the sequence of certain jobs and careers, and you used engineering as an example. And I think that would be a very powerful nugget for folks that are here to talk about that.
So there's been some really sophisticated econometric work on returns to different kinds of education. And one paper in particular looks at engineering, and the wage differential out of high school for engineering students is quite large relative to almost anything else. There's a lot of demand for them. But if you look at the differential, it actually shrinks over the next decade of the person's work life. And you might have expected the reverse. Well, so the best interpretation of what's going on is, over the first 10 years of my work life, I'm in fact unskilling, or I'm not losing anything I already had. It's just the rest of the economy is getting better, and the kind of things taught in engineering 5 years later is better than what I learned, and so the differential actually narrows over that decade. And the only way to improve that would be to, again, make sure that the worker is staying up to date in the technologies of the day. And so again, the upskilling is a key issue. Again, imagine, it'd be really interesting if we could take a snapshot today and come back 10 years from today and look at how different the jobs that people are doing are, right? How they're doing it, the role of AI, but again, lots of other kinds of technologies and just evolving demands. Smartphones, they're always my favorite example. I mean, these things, started in 2007? Now there's people in the room who think these have existed forever. 2007 wasn't so long ago. That's just 16 years. That's like saying today's 18-year-olds, when they're 34, that's how old these things are. And things that we never even imagined at least I never imagined will exist, and we can't possibly anticipate what that's going to be. And I was I'm obviously older than almost anybody in the room, and I was advantaged by the fact that The early years of my life as a worker, things didn't evolve like they have today. And of course, they're evolving in my area as well. Randy and Chrissy were gracious enough to involve us in my research center at the time, which, by the way, was named for Randy Boyd before he became president of the university, but because he liked the work we were doing and chose to invest in us. But they started having us study the outcomes of Knox Achieve, a dozen years ago. And so we've been I had to get a young academic to work with me because of the evolution of how we do things. And we wrote a paper recently, it was just published in the last year, on Knox Achieves and the outcomes of it. We were able to follow these students now for a decade after they had completed. And we had to change several times the methodologies we were using while the paper was at the journal, because things are evolving so fast. It's not just your world, they're evolving for us too. And this young woman, Celeste Carruthers, who we talked about, who is just a marvelous academic, and Celeste was gracious enough to put my name on the paper too. They're evolving everywhere. And by the way, a lot of this evolution is happening because of big data and big computing capacities that just didn't exist before. So it's happening, for PhDs, or it's happening for people, with the least skilled jobs. The question is, can you evolve with them?
To that point, and then I'm going to open it up for Q&A to the audience, I think everything that you've talked about this morning, can you evolve with it? I still go back to the premise for many of us in College Promise, which is, since 100 years ago when we made public high school available for all, we haven't had a big shift in making universally in America an extension post-high school, right? And think of what has changed in the last 100 years, right? Think of the last 100, older than all of us here in the room, but we still see as the last major big investment being universal high school for all. So I think it's just a reminder that we have a tremendous opportunity as a community to advocate, just to keep pace, right, with all of the realities that are happening and to strengthen the economy. I think this is a national security issue as well, because if you don't have folks working, if they don't see themselves connected to the economy in their country, it creates an unsteady foundation. Right, in most economies.
I think it does. And again, if we look at culturally what's happening, as we're seeing big differentials in education across gender, but also some declines in college going. We're seeing marriage rates slowing down. As I've already noted, we're seeing birth rates slowing down, and these have broad economic effects, not just on the household of those individuals, but across the entire economy. As was noted when I was introduced, I've had the privilege to work in a number of other countries, in Russia in earlier times, and in Hungary, countries where the population was, when I was working there, had already flattened out or was declining. Tennessee last year had negative natural population growth. That's births minus deaths was negative, more deaths than births. Now, COVID and some other things added to that, but the whole country is going to be in that position. And we're probably not going to be every year, but by, let's say, the mid-30s or something like that, the whole country is going to be in that position. This has huge implications for how we fund things like Social Security and Medicare, but also just culturally, how we relate to each other. And so it does matter a lot to the country, and it matters to the individual. That's why you all are doing what you're doing.
I think that's incredibly well said. We're going to open up to Q&A. Betty will be Rich, Arizona.
First of all, thank you for your comments, and we could not agree more in Arizona. I think we have a similar situation that you're facing here in Tennessee. One thing we're really thinking about, I'd love your opinion on, is how we actually put together the right message frameworks around this issue that you're talking about, especially with kind of this lure of, high floor, low ceiling employment without, without criticizing the choice of the individual. And, what are those compelling messages? How do we get that out there without just having to tell people they're going to make more money? Because, we haven't found that effective.
Yeah. So I'm happy to respond to it. Again, I think there are people in this room who are, frankly, more skilled at responding to that. What can we do? What messages have connected with young people? I would guess, okay, so my normal thing is I'd have a bunch of charts up here illustrating. That's probably not going to work with 18-year-olds, and you know that better than I do. And so, stories of success I would think, are likely to be the best way to do it. And finding places real examples in Arizona of people who, okay, maybe it's like Randy did earlier. You use Dustin. You don't actually use their name, but this person did this person did that. Here's what worked. But yeah, I mean, finding compelling ways to tell that you're going to make more, you're going to be unemployed less, you're going to have capacity to work longer, you're less likely to be engaged in criminal activity or go to prison. I mean, you name it, the outcomes are better. And the only challenge is that we're asking them to look forward a little bit. And I mean, that's challenging for all of us, right? I mean, it's not unique to today's 18-year-olds. I was 18, every one of you all were. And I know all of you all at 18 were mature and ready to make all the right decisions, right? And I mean, it's a challenge. And I'm not saying that I'm sitting here with the answer. I can analyze where we need to be, but telling the right story and a compelling story, that's again, why you all are doing such great work and continue to have success at doing that.
And Rich, I know Reverend Jones is going to talk about this a little bit later. I think the reality that most of this youth is seeing pain points in their own households, right? Because their parents are being impacted by many of these changes. I think we have this tremendous opportunity to respectfully engage the family unit here, because it's just happening in real time across the country, regardless of geography, regardless of gender, regardless of ethnicity. And I think as a community, there's opportunities for us to improve that. Any other questions from the audience? Kelly.
Thank you for all of your comments. The one thing I wanted to ask about, Bill, is you talked a little bit about the decreasing birth rates, the talent deficit coming about. We've had a lot of working mothers. I myself am a working mother, so I think of what this looks like. A lot have stepped out. We have, there's been a change in the way that the future workforce looks, as well as why the birth rates are continuing to decrease. There's also the shortage in childcare resources and now less choice for women that may not decide, if they don't want to go into parenthood. But I'm hearing all of this and what is here for the future in the changing landscape, and I'm just really curious what the data looks like for women right now, and especially mothers.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're aware that, what does it look like for women? They tend to earn less than males. Some of that is career choices. But even when you net out career choices, there's still a differential there. The sort of guesses about that is that childbearing plays a role in that, because then at any point in time, less experience in the labor force than a male who didn't obviously have a child in that same window. So there's the earnings differential. We have a challenge as a country because we're aging at the same point that we want more children. And in some sense of the word, the same people who are going to be the caregivers for the elderly are also the caregivers for small children, and we simply don't have enough of them. And so, we talk about things like, well, let's subsidize that, or let's have the company. Well, where do they provide the service? Where do they get the workers to do this? And so we are challenged with a labor force that can actually be the child caregivers or the caregivers broadly, right? Because it's both ends of the age spectrum where we have that. Women obviously have become a really important part of economic growth in the country. If you go from, let's say, 1975, 80 up through 2000 or so, incredible growth in the labor force participation rate of women. It still remains well under men, but caught up a lot in that window, and it was a key part of the economic growth. And as again, I'm sure you're aware, something like 60% of post-high school education is women today. And, my take on that is that's marvelous, but we cannot afford an economy where young males are not keeping up with young females. We need both in school. And, if you had to, there's a gap on both, but it's getting to young males, and particularly young males of color, and that is where the biggest problem is. But again, women, look at this group, but go to any group of leadership, and you're finding women playing a bigger and bigger role. And that's a great outcome. It's showing the differential in education, though, as well.
Well, it should be a both and, right?
Which is what I'm trying to emphasize.
We have to get to a both and. I think I'm not going to call out the university, but they had a huge spread in a major publication because their incoming freshman class was 70% female to 30% male, and it was disruptive because they were having to do second and third looks of applicants to try and create this balance. And I think to your point is when, I spent 20 years in national security. I'm telling you, wars are fought when you don't have balance in some of this type of situation where young men don't feel connected, don't see a pathway into the economy, where young men and women can't find each other, right? Because there is just that economic disparity between the two. And I think we have to do this both and.
Absolutely. That's what I'm emphasizing. And we don't want to in any way discourage young women. In fact, we want to get more of them into school. But it's got to be an and.
Right.
We've got one more question over here before we wrap up.
Courtney Richardson from the west side of the state, Memphis, Tennessee. And what I am seeing a lot of, and you talk about like these jobs that are going to be replaced with like AI and technology. When I think about our large demographic of like boys of color, it seems that boys of color are the ones who are being chosen to be trained and participate in the workforce with those jobs that are going to be replaced. And much of that is because the boys of color are not necessarily prepared to go into our four-year institutions, and that is where there is opportunity. How do we make sure, one, that we feel the immediate need of industries? Like in Memphis, we have Blue Oval City is coming. So we just need folks to graduate who are going to go immediately into some of those particular industries. But what does it look like to prepare them or put responsibility on even some of the corporations to say, you need this immediately, but how do we make sure that in 10 years, once technology comes into play, that this population is not left to be the vulnerable group, remain the vulnerable group, let me say.
That is a really insightful point that I totally agree with. And so I've done a lot of work on the mobility issue. And about 20% of the economy is linked to either manufacturing vehicles, like in Blue Oval, or driving them, or repairing them, or insuring them, or whatever. And we're going to have this incredible evolution of that industry over the next couple of decades. And we're talking about the shortage of truck drivers and trying to get a bunch of people out driving trucks when we all know that those trucks are going to be autonomous in a decade or so. And so we're going to take today's 20-year-olds and have them be 30 or 35 and have no career option. And so if we're going to continue to move people into areas that in the short term we need workers, we have to link that with the capacity to build training. And again, back to truck drivers, there is, according to the Department of Commerce, there is no occupation that has less transferability to anything else than truck driving. And yet we're telling lots of young people, go out because you can make a good living. We're not telling them, but only for a decade. And so your point, I think, is right on target. And the thing is, we've never had an era where the evolutions are so fast. And that's why, again, if we're going to have programs to get those people into the jobs, there must be a way to help upskill them at the same point in time. Otherwise, we're taking a short-term approach to what's a long-term issue, and we will pay the price a decade or 15 years. And by the way, electric cars, and this was a big part of the strike, electric cars take much less labor component than internal combustion engine vehicles. And that's a big part of what, the unions realize this. And if we move to electric, we're simply going to have fewer jobs in these industries. Very difficult to operate in an environment where the economy is evolving so fast. And we as a nation must solve that.
And I think we have a role to play in this community to solve that, right? And I think that's where you're so important to the country in what you're doing, because there needs to be that honest broker, there needs to be that trusted partner, there needs to be a place where the interests of these students, the interests of your community are forward. And I think, I want to thank you, Dr. Fox, because I think you've set the stage for what I believe will be some even more compelling conversations today and this afternoon and tomorrow as to why, as a community, this is our time in many ways. This is our time to continue and step up and really help advise and become a partner in the conversation to all of these families and these scholars. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be here.
Thank you so much, Rosye.